From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
So we have a very special morning with you, and we're excited to share it. We have both here in the room very special guests, and we also have some friends with us that are going to be online, live, in live stream. So we have some friends from Pennsylvania and from Arkansas. So I want to hear in your loudest voices, we're going to practice saying, "Hello, Arkansas." You ready? 1, 2, 3, go. All right, great. And we're going to try one more time with Pennsylvania. Ready? So loudest voices. This is your time. You have permission to just be loud. And then when Dr. Hayden actually greets them, you'll be able to say hello as loud as you want. This is the one time you get to be as loud as you want. You ready for that? Okay, let's try one time with hello, Pennsylvania. Loud though, right? I'm soft, you're loud. Ready? 1, 2, 3. All right, that's awesome.
A couple of states in there.
Yes.
And not only are we going to be loud and we're going to, say hello, Pennsylvania, and hello, Arkansas. How about if we wave too? Because see all these cameras? They're looking at us. Isn't that something? So I'm Carla Hayden, and I'm the Librarian of Congress. And I'm so excited that all of you in where? Arkansas? Let's say it. Hello, Arkansas.
Hello, Arkansas.
And hello, Pennsylvania.
Hello, Pennsylvania.
We're glad everybody's here because this is a special month. Does anybody know what month this is that makes it so special and why? Okay, this is March.
March.
Right, it's March and spring is in the air. It's also a month that's called Women's History Month. I know, an entire month. And
Just a month.
Just a month, but it's a good month. It's a good month because we are able to have special people to join us. And today we have someone who has been called a living legend. Living. She's still living. Because some legends, as you know, are way in the past. But we are so excited. Arkansas, can you hear us? Yay! Let's say it again. Arkansas.
Arkansas.
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania.
Because we have Miss Cokie Roberts. Now, many of you know that she has been in television and a lot. But she's still living. She's still living. She has been with the National Public Radio, ABC, you name it. Ms. Cokie Roberts has been part of talking about what's going on every day. And in the meantime, she's also been able to write books. So I'm going to ask you later, how did you do all of this at one time? But she has 2 books. One about, have you ever heard the term founding fathers? You've heard that? Did you know there were founding mothers? There were women that actually helped with the country. And now, a new book, Ladies of Liberty. So, you are here with Ms. Cokie Roberts, and I'm going to be over here and listen too, because she's going to tell you about her book.
Okay, well, first of all, yes, a hand to Dr. Hayden. Dr. Hayden is in charge of this whole big building, and they're building across the street and other buildings around the country that have every book that was ever published in them. How many books are in the Library of Congress?
38 million.
38 million books, and movies and records and paintings and musical instruments and all kinds of things. This is where they all are. So when you get a little bit bigger and you need to do some research, does anybody know what research is? What's research? Okay, go ahead. You search for something, usually for what? For, why you'd be looking for something, huh? Causes? Well, that's a good reason to do research, yes, but often to write a school paper or write a book. And actually, when I was in school here in Washington, I did a lot of my research here in the Library of Congress. So it's a great place to come and learn about all kinds of things. And in writing my books, these are children's books, but I wrote grown-up books with the same names. And I did a lot of my work here in the Library of Congress for those books. But the reason I wrote those books is because I kept looking at pictures of, say, the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution or things like that. And I thought, there's something missing in these pictures. Do you think there's something missing? Huh? What do you think's missing in those pictures? When you look at the pictures of the folks writing the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence, what's missing? Do you have a guess? What might be missing? Huh? Do you see? Go ahead. Women, right. There are no women in those pictures. None. So my question was, were there women then? Do you think there were women then? What do you think? Yeah? Just let's see if some of the kids here. You think there were women? Yeah? How do you know? There's no evidence. We don't see any pictures of them. How do we know there were women then? Go ahead.
They were making stuff for men.
They were what?
Making stuff for men.
They were making stuff for men. They certainly were. All kinds of things. But so I was very curious about what they were doing, since it was a very important time in our country. It's when the country started to become a country. And the first thing that had to happen for the United States to become the United States was that we had to fight a war. And we had to fight a war against who? Who do we have to fight against? Guys? Who do we have to fight against? We fought a war called the American Revolution, right. And who was it against? No, not Russia. It was against Britain. And at that point, we were part of Britain. We weren't our own country. And the men and women who were here said, we want to be on our own. We want to be our own country. And so they said, we're gonna tell Britain that we want to be our own country. And they wrote something called the Declaration of Independence to say, we are not part of you anymore, we're independent. But Great Britain said, you are part of us, and we're going to show you, you're going to have to fight to be a separate country. And so they fought us. And we had a general in charge during the American Revolution. What was his name? George Washington, exactly right. And George Washington had a wife. What was her name? Anybody remember? Huh? Her name was Martha Washington. And every year, the soldiers that George Washington was leading went to camp. And they would, at the winter time, it would be very, very cold, and sometimes they didn't have enough to eat, and sometimes they didn't have a place to stay. And Martha Washington would come into camp, and she and the other officers' wives would sew for the soldiers and cook for the soldiers and make up songs for the soldiers and have big dances for the soldiers so that they would be happier and they would stay in the army. And so George Washington wanted her to come every year, even though it was scary, because sometimes bullets were flying and that wasn't a lot of fun. But then the country became a country because we won that war, And George Washington became what? The president. What number president? The first president. And Martha Washington became the first lady. And she had to figure out how to do that, which was complicated. And then, actually, I should tell you, one of the years that they were at camp during the war, this woman came to visit George Washington. And her name was Phyllis Wheatley. Has anybody ever heard of her? She was a poet. She was a very famous poet. And she had been a slave. She had been enslaved. But she became free, and as a teenager, she wrote these poems that were so popular that people in England read about them and people in America read about them. So she was known on both sides of the ocean. And George Washington wanted to meet her because she was so famous and wrote such wonderful poems. And so when he was in camp in Massachusetts, she went to visit him, and he said she was gifted by the muse, meaning she wrote such beautiful poems. But then after he became president, the country still needed some help because there was a lot of work to be done making it a new country. And the British came again and were not happy that we had become a brand new country. And they were trying to take us back to be part of Britain. And so there was another war. And that one was called the War of 1812. And the British came here to Washington. And Dolly Madison was then the president's wife, the first lady. Do you know what her husband's name was? If she was Madison, what was her husband's name? Dr. Hayden's giving it away. James Madison. And he had gone out to camp with the soldiers to see what was going on in the field. And she was at the White House. And the British were coming. And she went up on the top of the White House with a spyglass, they call it. It was like binoculars. And she could see them coming in the distance. And she kept waiting for her husband to get home. And she had made a big dinner for him and for his cabinet and some generals. And they weren't coming. And she could see the British coming. And everybody said to her, "You've got to go, you've got to go. It's getting really dangerous. The British are coming." And she said, "Well, I'm not going to go until I make sure that the portrait of George Washington is safe, because the British will do something awful to it." So she made sure it was taken down from the walls of the White House and safely taken away in a carriage before she left the White House. And so she escaped just as the British arrived in Washington. And they got here and they started burning the city. They burned the Capitol and they marched down Pennsylvania Avenue burning things. And then they got to the White House. But you know what they did before they burned it down? They sat down and ate Dolly Madison's dinner. And they said it was a delicious dinner. And they were sorry that they had to do something so awful to her. But they did. And so after they finished their dinner, they took a torch and lit the White House. And since they didn't have George Washington's picture to steal, they stole Dolly Madison's picture and took it with them as they left. So then the country still had to be a country, and they beat the British again. And it was now clear that we were going to be the United States of America, and that we were going to go on and be a great country. And we became a bigger country because Thomas Jefferson had decided to buy some land that doubled the size of the country. Does anybody know what that was called when he bought all that land? It's called the Louisiana Purchase. And he asked a couple of men to go see what was on the land, see how big it was. And they had an expedition called the Lewis and Clark Expedition. And they needed someone, because they knew they were going to be dealing with Native Americans as they went all the way across the country to the Pacific Ocean. and they needed someone to help them talk to the Indians. So they went up to an Indian settlement in what's now North Dakota, then it wasn't a state, and met a man who could speak some of the native languages, and he was married to this woman. Does anybody know who she is? Huh? Anybody know who that is? No? That's Sacagawea. And she was a young Indian girl who, right before they set out on this big expedition to go all the way across the country, she had a baby. So she had to do this with her baby on her back. There's the baby. And as they set out on their expedition, they realized that Sacagawea knew all kinds of things that nobody else knew. She knew how to find all kinds of fruits and berries and vegetables that were hidden in the soil so she could help everybody eat. And when there was a bad flood, because they were going by river most of the way, and the boats were swamped with water, she saved a lot of the provisions, and the men who wrote about it, Lewis and Clark, said she was wonderful, and her husband was totally useless. But she did all this with a baby on her back, and she was only probably 15 years old. But she still did this incredible walk across the country. But at some point, they knew they were going to hit big, tall mountains. And what would they need to get across the mountains? The boats weren't going to get them across the mountains, right? What? Well, it wasn't skis so much. A stick would help, but what would carry them across the mountains? Yeah.
And you can like go
You can do that for rope climbing, but what would you ride across the mountain back in the olden days? Yeah.
sled.
No, it wouldn't be a sled. Go ahead.
Horses.
Horses. They needed horses. And the people who had horses were the Native Americans. And the Shoshone tribe was known to have the best horses. And when they reached the Shoshones out in what's probably now Wyoming, Sacagawea, who was a Shoshone, said, my brother has become the chief since I've been away. And she was so excited to see him and see all of her old friends. And then she worked it out so that Lewis and Clark got the horses. They traded them for some ammunition, and off they went across the mountains and got all the way to the Pacific Ocean. But right before they got to the Pacific Ocean, they set up camp, and the men were going to go see the ocean. And Sacagawea said, that's not fair. I've come all this way with you, and I've guided you along the way and shown you how to go and gotten you these horses, and you're not letting me go see the big water? That's not fair. And they said, you're right. And so she went with them to see it. And then she guided them back all the way across the country to St. Louis, Missouri. And when they got there, Clark wrote that she should have gotten a bigger reward than she got because she had been so important to what they were doing. Well, she sure should have, because you know what her reward was? 0. So it was not fair to her, but she had a very interesting experience. And then William Clark helped raise her son, the baby who had been on her back. But while the country was moving west, and everybody was excited to have this very brave new country where they could have a new life and start off new farms or new businesses all on their own, there were some people who weren't doing as well. And some of them were poor, and some of them were widows, women whose husbands had died. And some of them were children whose parents had died, who were orphans. And the women looked around and saw that and said, we need to do something about that. And so one of them was a woman named Isabella Graham, and she was a widow herself. Her husband had died, and she had 4 little children. And she moved to New York, and she opened a school for girls, and she made some money on that school, so that then she was able to do what she really wanted to do, which was help the poor people. So she started with other women. One of them was Eliza Hamilton. Anybody know who her husband might have been? Alexander Hamilton was her husband. And one of them was Elizabeth Bailey Seton. You go to Seton School? Yeah. And one of them was Mother Seton, who I'll tell you about as well. She's got a big story in this book. Here she is. So that's your school. This is the woman that your school is named after. Yeah, go ahead. Her husband was dead. I'll tell you her story in just a minute. So these women got together and they said, we have to help the children of New York. So they started an orphanage, which was really hard to do because they didn't have the right to vote. Women couldn't vote till not even 100 years ago. And this is more than 200 years ago. And they couldn't even own property. Their husbands had to own their property if they were married. But they were brave and they went to the people who ran the state and said, we need an orphanage, you have to help us. And then they went out into the streets and had meetings of the public and said, we need an orphanage, you have to help us. And they started an orphanage, and it's still in New York today, helping children. It's not an orphanage anymore, children don't live there, but it still helps the children of New York. So even without any rights, these women did incredible work that has been lasting. And Elizabeth Bailey Seton, that your school's named after, was one of them. So she left New York because her husband was sick, and they went to Italy hoping that he'd get well in Italy. And he died. And so she came back to America. She had 5 children. And she came back with no money. And she went to Baltimore and opened a school. And the Bishop of Baltimore said, we need you to open more schools. And so she opened more and more and more schools all over the country. And she opened orphanages as well, and hospitals. And she did incredible work all over the place because these children and poor people needed her. And she just said, I'm going to do it. And it was really hard work, but she did it. We also had in this time some first ladies, and one of them was the wife of the president, who was the son of President Adams, and his name was what? Anybody know the name of the son of President Adams, who was also a president? Yeah?
Louis, I just remember his name started with the L.
Go ahead.
Quincy Adams?
John Quincy Adams. And his wife is the only other first lady other than Mrs. Trump to have been born outside of the United States. Her name was Louisa Catherine Adams, and she was born in England, where her father was working for the United States in England. But she had never been to America when she married John Quincy Adams, and she came and she was very involved in politics. And her father-in-law, who had been president, John Adams, she wrote to him and said, it is my job, my vocation was the word she used, my job to get my husband elected president. You know, people don't think women were involved in politics then. They're wrong. The women were very, very involved in politics. And she worked to get her husband elected president, and she succeeded. And but she also worked with the women here in Washington to help the poor children. because after the British had invaded, they needed help as well. And there was an orphanage started by the women here, and it still is going. Again, not an orphanage anymore, but helping children in Washington. It's Hillcrest. And so these women did incredible things. And they were very, very interested in making sure that the country was a better country. It was a great country, but they wanted it to be a better country. And so then they started looking around and seeing the things that it was not just people that were poor, but there were people who were enslaved. And they thought that was the wrong thing. And so they started working for freedom for the slaves. And then they started going to those meetings about freedom for the slaves, and they discovered that they weren't allowed to talk because they were women. And they weren't allowed to vote because they were women, and it made them mad. And so then they started working for women to have the right to vote. So the two great big things that have happened in this country to make it a better country, lots of things have happened, but the two great big things, ending slavery and making sure that everybody could vote, started very, very early, and it started with the women. So that's why I call them the Ladies of Liberty, because they made this happen. So I'm really happy to share them with you today, and I'm happy to take your questions if you have some questions, okay?
And we also want to thank Everybody Wins. That's a group that made sure that Ms. Roberts was here. So please thank Everybody Wins. You see the wonderful sign? Because everybody wins when we read together. So we have, you can ask questions, and we have questions from Arkansas and Pennsylvania too.
So that's exciting. We'll hear from the other kids as well. So somebody had a question back here. Sir? Oh, he's turned around. You had a question. Yeah, okay.
When was this book made? When was it published? Today or a long day ago?
No, not a long time ago. It was just published this year. And I should have told you a little bit more about the illustrations, because the woman who drew the pictures did a wonderful job. Her name is Diane Good. And she drew these great pictures of all these women. And when she was doing the first book, this one came out first, and it was a couple of years ago. And she got very interested in all of their writings, not just what they wrote, but how they wrote, their handwriting. And she got an old-fashioned, that's called a quill, that's what they wrote with, and had a little point on the end. And she started writing with that, just like they did. And she lives in New Jersey, and then Hurricane Sandy hit, and she didn't have any power, so she was in the dark and had to draw by candlelight, so she really knew how they felt. And she got so interested, she said to me, "Do you think we can find all of their signatures?" And so I said, "Gee, that's going to be hard." Because it's really hard to find out things about women from a couple of hundred years ago. But I did. I found all of their signatures. So under each of their pictures is how they wrote their name. And I teased her that she did such a good job of copying how they wrote their names that she should be a counterfeiter in her next job. Okay. Yeah.
Will you have the Lady of Liberty in other libraries?
Yes, it's in libraries all around the country, I'm happy to say.
Did you just put all the you were just talking about all the important ladies? Are those the only ladies in the book?
So in the book, the publisher, the people who published the book, wanted 10 ladies in each book. So I picked 10 for each book. And so there are people from different parts of the country, and there are people of different races in both books. Yes.
Yes. We have a question from Pine Road Elementary School,
Right.
which is in Pennsylvania. You remember you guys said hi, Pennsylvania? So lots of kids in the 5th grade have a question.
Oh,
so
good.
Joel, Valentina, Jacqueline, Abdullah all want to know, why did you decide to write a book about women who helped form this country?
Well, because I thought it was important that we know about them. You know, it's my view that if you only know about half of the human race and not the other half of the human race, you don't know the whole story. And it's not even really accurate. It's not exactly true if you only know about half of the human race. So I thought it was very important that we know the whole story and what everybody was doing to create this country and make it the wonderful country that it is. We have another one from there.
We actually just have a tweet that Shelley Porter is excited that Mrs. Johnson's 4th grade class is participating with us live from Arkansas.
Well, that is exciting. Yay! So, more questions here. Right here.
We
Yes,
have one
okay.
more. We have one from Arkansas Crossett Elementary School. And Cameron wants to know, who is in 4th grade, which Lady of Liberty was your favorite to write about?
So people always want to know who my favorite was. And the truth is I don't really have a favorite because they were all very different from each other. And some of them would have been a lot of fun to have dinner with. I think that, let's see, in this book I would say that Louisa Adams would have been fun to have dinner with because she had a good sense of humor. And some of them I would have just admired greatly, like Elizabeth Seton, who I told you about. And some of them I would have been very interested to just get to know because of their writings. This woman, Judith Sargent Murray, wrote way back in the 1700s. She wrote that women should be equal. And so this picture of the scales with a little boy and a little girl on the scale at the same level, she wrote and said, does anybody look at a 2-year-old boy and a 2-year-old girl and think that the boy is smarter? What do you think? Huh? No? No. So what happens? What happens is at that time, girls weren't educated. So she said girls needed to go to school and become educated, and then they could do anything boys could do. So I would have loved getting to know her and know why she thought that so early when other people weren't thinking about it so much yet. So that was, so they're different ones I like for different reasons. Yeah, go ahead.
Did any one of them in each book, did any of them inspire you to do anything like this?
Well, actually what they have inspired me to do is to not say I can't do something. Because they did things that were really hard with much less ability to do them. You know, they didn't have computers and they didn't have dishwashers and they didn't have all the things that make our lives easier. And terrible diseases were around at the time. So sometimes a mom could lose 2 children in a week, and it was unbelievably sad. And still, they would do things for the country, not just for themselves, not just for their family, but they would do things for other people, even when they were having a very hard time themselves. So it's made me realize that I can't say, oh, it's too hard. That's just sissy talk. I have to be able to say, of course I can do it. These women did it.
How did you feel when you wrote Ladies of Liberty and Founding Mothers?
It was really nice to finish them. Writing a book is hard, and writing the grown-up books was very hard. And one of the reasons it's hard to write about women is because, as I was saying earlier, it's not easy to find. I talked about research, remember? it's hard to research them because people haven't saved a lot of their things. How do you think we learn about history? What do we look at? Yeah. Encyclopedias help, but the encyclopedias have to go to some place to learn. So where else might we learn about it? What might we read? Well, I tell you, we read letters, and we read diaries. See, now they're dead, so it's okay for us to read their diaries. So you have to save those letters and save those diaries for us to know what's in them. And for the women, a lot of people didn't save them. So it's, you have to really look hard to find out what they were doing. And so it's hard work to write the book, but it's really great to see it once it's done. Yeah. Anybody from?
We do have a question from Arkansas. We have a different elementary school,
Great.
Oak Grove.
Great.
So Logan wants to know, why did they want to steal the picture of Washington?
They wanted to steal the picture of Washington because Washington was the leader of the country, and everyone knew that. So sometimes, still today, you'll see that when someone is overthrown in a country, their government falls. For instance, in Iraq, when Saddam Hussein, I guess you all are still too young for that now, was ousted, they toppled his statue. And that had happened in America during the Revolutionary War. The King George's statue was up in New York, and the Americans sent it flying. So King George hit the dust. And so the British wanted to retaliate, wanted to fight back, and they wanted to take George Washington's picture and show the Americans that their leader no longer had a place of honor. But Dolly Madison made sure that didn't happen. Yeah.
Yep.
So, there else.
Why did all those people in the books, did all of them have a disease or?
No, they didn't all have a disease, but diseases would happen. And so sometimes something like yellow fever, which doesn't exist in America anymore, thank goodness, but would come and people would get sick and like that. But not everybody had it, but you'd sometimes have something happen where everybody in town or a lot of people in town would get sick, and it would be very, very hard. Okay.
Why did they wanted to take George Washington's picture, but then they took the lady's picture? Because why did they take the lady's picture instead of George Washington?
So they couldn't take George Washington's picture because it was gone. She had made sure that it wasn't there anymore. It was on a carriage on the way out of town. But her picture was there, and they were trying to find something that they could mess with, and so they took her picture and destroyed it. So, yeah.
We have a question from Avery in 4th grade, West Fork Elementary.
Great.
The question is, how much research did you have to do to write this book?
Lots and lots and lots of research. And as I said earlier, it wasn't that easy to do. And some of it is that people didn't think the women were important enough to save their letters. But some of it is that the women or their husbands burned their letters. So after George Washington died, for instance, Martha Washington burned all of her letters between herself and George, which I could kill her for if she weren't already dead. But we think she thought that they were just too personal, and that she didn't want people reading her personal mail later. So we only have a very few of her letters. But another woman, the wife of our second president, who was John Adams. John Adams was in the Congress leading up to the Revolutionary War, and he then became the person who spoke for America in Europe, in Holland and France and England. And because of that, he was away a lot of the time. And so his wife, Abigail Adams, wrote to him all the time. And fortunately, he saved her letters. And we have thousands of their letters to each other. And they tell us very, very interesting stories. And then her son, who was, so what this tells you is when her husband, when John Adams was in the Congress that was writing the Declaration of Independence, it was in Philadelphia. And she was in Massachusetts, where the British were. And it was really dangerous. And at one point, John wrote to her and said, if it gets really dangerous, take our children and fly to the woods. Thank you, John. Hope you're having a nice dinner in Philadelphia. But her son, John Quincy Adams, who also, of course, became president, kept a diary every single day. And we have everything that he wrote. So he wrote about his mother as well. And so we can learn about her from him. And so that's the way we do the research. But it's not easy. It can be very, very difficult to get the information. Yeah. Okay, do we have any more from afar?
We do have a lot, actually.
Okay,
so
well,
let's go back to Pennsylvania, Pine Road Elementary School. So we have Madeline, who's in 3rd grade, Pine Road Elementary, just to make sure we got that. What other children's books have you written?
These are the only 2 children's books I've written. I've written a bunch of grown-up books, the ones with these names, and then a book called We Are Our Mother's Daughters, and a book called From This Day Forward, and a book called Capital Dames, and then a book about the Jewish Passover celebrated in interfaith families, Our Haggadah. So a bunch of books in all, but just these 2 children's books.
Kind of a follow-up question from the same school. What inspired you to become an author for children?
Well, I became an author kind of almost by accident because I work, as Dr. Hayden said, I work covering the news, and it's a lot of work, and it takes a lot of time. And I really didn't think I had time to do anything else because I also raised a family. But a publisher came to me and said, write a book. And I said, what book? And she said, oh, you're bound to have a book. And I said, I actually don't have a book. And so she said, well, think about it. You've probably written some articles and given some talks that could be a book. And I said, okay, I'll think about it. So I did. I put together a lot of those things and some interesting interviews with people, and I wrote a book called We Are Our Mother's Daughters. And that book did very, very, very well. And so then the publisher wanted me to come back and write some more books. And so then my interest in history really got me writing the other books. And then I discovered that even as hard as it is, and it really is hard, that writing books is incredibly satisfying. And so I just keep doing it, even though I still have a day job. Yeah. But she's had a lot. Can we, this gentleman here is looking for a question. You don't have a question? Okay, well, how about one more from them then?
How about we have yet another school in Arkansas. This is from a librarian at Sparkman School in Sparkman, Arkansas. The 4th grade student Lane wants to know when you begin writing the book and if you'll be writing another book about influential women of today.
So not of today, because I write about people who are alive for my regular work, and they all get mad at you. So I don't want to write about living people in books. But I probably will write another book, and what's on my mind, I haven't 100% decided yet, is the fact that we're soon going to be celebrating the 100th anniversary of women getting the right to vote, finally. And not much has been written about the end of that. when women actually got the Congress to approve of the amendment that gave us the right to vote, and then having to go out to the states and get the states to do it. There's been nothing written about what's called ratification. And so that's probably my next book. But I haven't gotten there yet because I'm so busy right now with our new president that he's taking up a lot of my time. But there we go. Yeah.
How did you know all the faces of the women that were in your two books?
The faces? Is that your question? Yeah. So that's a very good question because, of course, we didn't have cameras then. So there were no photographs of the women. So what we have for most of them is someone did a painting of them. So it's copied after the paintings. And that's true for most of these women. But for a couple of them, we really don't have what they look like. Like this woman, who was very early in our history, whose sons, her name is Eliza Lucas Pinckney. Her sons were both in the Revolution, became great statesmen. And she was brilliant herself. When she was 16 years old, her father left her in charge of 2 plantations in South Carolina. So we have all of her writings, but there was never a portrait of her. What we do have, and travels around sometimes, is a dress of hers. So we know how big she was, but she started making silk and made a dress, and so we have that, but we don't really know exactly what she looked like. So it's a very good question. And then in this book we have this very interesting woman, Lucy Terry Prince, who we think wrote the first African-American poem, or composed it. And again, she was written about in all of the newspapers, which was really unusual for any woman, but particularly for a formerly enslaved woman. But she was brilliant, and she conducted arguments that she won. And she was known, very well known, but we don't really know what she looked like either. So those are, but for the rest of them, we have paintings. So. Well, thank you all so much for coming. And Dr. Hayden, I'm sure, wants to...
Well, we want to thank Miss Roberts. Can we thank her? And we want to thank our friends in Arkansas and Pennsylvania and tell them goodbye.
Bye.
Bye. And thank everybody wins. And Miss Roberts, thank you for making history come alive.
Well, thank you.
We
so
hope you
much
come back again.
Thank you. I'll be at the Library of Congress as often as possible.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you, kids.
Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.